Is the Ukraine-Russia conflict a harbinger of World War III? 1. What sparked the conflict between Russia and Ukraine? The conflict between Russia and Ukraine can be traced back to the Euromaidan protests that took place in Ukraine in late 2013 and early 2014. These protests were initially sparked by Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych's decision to back out of a planned trade deal with the European Union in favor of closer ties with Russia. The protesters were calling for Yanukovych's resignation and for Ukraine to move closer to the West. In February 2014, Yanukovych was ousted in a popular uprising and fled to Russia. This was seen as a major setback for Russian President Vladimir Putin, who had been working to strengthen ties with Ukraine and maintain Russia's influence in the region. In response, Russia annexed Crimea from Ukraine in March 2014, claiming that it was protecting the interests of ethnic Russians living in the region. This move was widely condemned by the international community, and tensions between Russia and Ukraine escalated further. Pro-Russian separatist movements emerged in eastern Ukraine, leading to a conflict that has continued to this day. The conflict has also been fueled by long-standing historical, cultural, and linguistic differences between Russia and Ukraine, as well as economic and geopolitical considerations. 2. How has the international community responded to the conflict? The international community has responded to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine in various ways, including political and economic sanctions, diplomatic efforts, and military support for Ukraine. Many countries, including the United States, the European Union, and Canada, have imposed economic sanctions on Russia in response to its annexation of Crimea and support for separatist rebels in eastern Ukraine. These sanctions have targeted Russia's energy, finance, and defense sectors, and have had a significant impact on the Russian economy. Diplomatic efforts to resolve the conflict have also been ongoing. The Minsk II agreement, signed in February 2015, aimed to establish a ceasefire and implement a political settlement between Ukraine and the separatist rebels in eastern Ukraine. However, the agreement has been repeatedly violated and the conflict has continued. The international community has also provided military support to Ukraine, including the provision of weapons and training. The United States and other NATO countries have provided non-lethal aid, such as military equipment and supplies, while Ukraine's European neighbors have provided training and other forms of support. Overall, the international response to the conflict has been mixed, with some countries advocating for a diplomatic solution while others have taken a more confrontational approach towards Russia. The conflict remains unresolved, and tensions between Russia and the West remain high. Some text goes here. What is the significance of Crimea in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine? Some text goes here. Crimea is a peninsula in the Black Sea that was historically part of Russia until it was transferred to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic in 1954. The transfer was done by Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev as a symbolic gesture to mark the 300th anniversary of the Treaty of Pereyaslav, which brought Ukraine under Russian control. The annexation of Crimea by Russia in March 2014 was a major turning point in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The annexation was widely condemned by the international community as a violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and led to a significant escalation of tensions between Russia and the West. Crimea is strategically important to Russia for several reasons. It is home to Russia's Black Sea Fleet, which is based in the city of Sevastopol, and provides Russia with a warm water port that is critical for its naval operations in the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. Crimea is also of great symbolic significance to many Russians, who see it as an integral part of Russia's historical and cultural heritage. For Ukraine, the loss of Crimea has been a significant blow to its territorial integrity and national pride. The annexation of Crimea has also fueled separatist movements in eastern Ukraine, where pro-Russian rebels have declared independence and sought to establish closer ties with Russia. The conflict in eastern Ukraine remains unresolved, and the annexation of Crimea continues to be a major point of contention between Russia and the international community. 4. How has the conflict impacted the daily lives of people living in Ukraine? The conflict between Russia and Ukraine has had a significant impact on the daily lives of people living in Ukraine, particularly those living in the eastern regions of Donetsk and Luhansk where the fighting has been most intense. The conflict has led to the displacement of over 1.5 million people, many of whom have been forced to flee their homes due to the fighting. This has created a humanitarian crisis, with many people living in overcrowded and poorly equipped temporary housing. The conflict has also had a profound impact on the Ukrainian economy, with the country experiencing a sharp decline in GDP and rising inflation. The conflict has disrupted trade and commerce, and has led to a decrease in foreign investment and tourism. In addition to the economic impact, the conflict has also had a psychological impact on many Ukrainians. The ongoing fighting, coupled with the uncertainty of the situation, has led to increased levels of stress, anxiety, and trauma among many Ukrainians. The conflict has also created divisions within Ukrainian society, particularly along linguistic and cultural lines. Many Ukrainians feel a strong sense of national identity and pride, and see the conflict as a struggle to defend their country's sovereignty and independence. However, there are also many Ukrainians who identify more closely with Russia and who see the conflict as a reflection of broader cultural and historical ties between the two countries. This has led to a polarization of public opinion and a breakdown in social cohesion. 5. What role do the separatist movements in eastern Ukraine play in the conflict? The separatist movements in eastern Ukraine have played a significant role in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The separatists are primarily ethnic Russians who live in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine, and they have sought to establish independent republics that are closely aligned with Russia. The separatists have been supported by Russia, which has provided them with military equipment, training, and other forms of assistance. Russia has denied that it is directly involved in the conflict, but the evidence suggests otherwise, with many Russian troops and military hardware being found in eastern Ukraine. The separatists have also been responsible for numerous human rights abuses, including the targeting of civilians, the use of torture, and the forced displacement of populations. The separatists have also been accused of shooting down Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 in July 2014, killing all 298 people on board. The separatist movements in eastern Ukraine have complicated efforts to resolve the conflict, as they are seen as illegitimate by the Ukrainian government and the international community. The separatists have rejected the authority of the Ukrainian government and have refused to participate in the political process aimed at resolving the conflict. Overall, the separatist movements in eastern Ukraine have deepened the divide between Ukraine and Russia and have contributed to the ongoing violence and instability in the region. 6. What is the impact of the conflict on the Ukrainian economy? The conflict between Russia and Ukraine has had a significant impact on the Ukrainian economy. The ongoing violence and instability in the eastern regions of the country, where much of Ukraine's heavy industry is located, has led to a sharp decline in industrial output and a contraction of the economy as a whole. The conflict has disrupted trade and commerce, with many Ukrainian businesses facing difficulties in exporting their goods to Russia and other countries. This has led to a decrease in foreign investment and tourism, as investors and tourists are deterred. Seven. How has the conflict affected Russia's relations with other countries? The conflict between Russia and Ukraine has had a significant impact on Russia's relations with other countries. Russia's annexation of Crimea and its support for the separatist movements in eastern Ukraine have been widely condemned by the international community, and have led to a deterioration in Russia's relations with many countries, particularly those in the West. In response to Russia's actions, many countries have imposed economic sanctions on Russia, targeting key sectors such as energy, finance, and defense. These sanctions have had a significant impact on the Russian economy, contributing to a decline in GDP and a depreciation of the ruble. Russia's actions in Ukraine have also led to a shift in the geopolitical balance of power, with many countries in Eastern Europe and the Baltic states becoming increasingly wary of Russian aggression. This has led to a strengthening of NATO and the European Union, as countries seek to counter the perceived threat from Russia. However, Russia has also sought to strengthen its relationships with other countries, particularly those in the Middle East and Asia. Russia has increased its involvement in Syria, providing military support to the Syrian government, and has sought to develop closer economic ties with countries such as China and India. Overall, the conflict in Ukraine has had a significant impact on Russia's relationships with other countries, leading to increased tensions with the West and a shifting of the geopolitical balance of power. Some text goes here are what is the involvement of outside powers, such as the United States and the European Union, in the conflict? Some text goes here. The United States and the European Union have been involved in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine since its outset, primarily through diplomatic and economic measures. The United States and the European Union have condemned Russia's annexation of Crimea and its support for the separatist movements in eastern Ukraine, and have implemented a range of economic sanctions targeting key sectors of the Russian economy. In addition to sanctions, the United States and the European Union have provided military and financial assistance to Ukraine, including providing training, equipment, and other forms of support to the Ukrainian military. The United States and the European Union have also worked to support the political and economic reforms aimed at strengthening Ukraine's democratic institutions and improving its economic prospects. The United States and the European Union have also been involved in efforts to negotiate a peaceful resolution to the conflict, through diplomatic channels such as the Minsk Agreements. The Minsk Agreements, which were signed in 2015, aim to establish a ceasefire and a political framework for resolving the conflict, but have been repeatedly violated by both sides. Overall, the involvement of the United States and the European Union in the conflict has been primarily diplomatic and economic, aimed at pressuring Russia to change its behavior in supporting Ukraine's efforts to defend its territorial integrity and pursue political and economic reforms. 9. What is the likelihood of a peaceful resolution to the conflict? The likelihood of a peaceful resolution to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine remains uncertain. While efforts have been made to negotiate a political solution to the conflict, including through the Minsk Agreements, these efforts have been repeatedly undermined by ongoing violence and a lack of political will on both sides. One of the main obstacles to a peaceful resolution of the conflict is the deep-seated mistrust and animosity between Ukraine and Russia, which has been fueled by years of historical grievances and geopolitical tensions. Both sides have accused the other of violating ceasefires and failing to uphold their commitments under previous agreements, and there is little evidence of any significant progress towards a lasting resolution. In addition to the political obstacles, there are also significant economic, social, and humanitarian challenges that need to be addressed in order to resolve the conflict. The ongoing violence and instability in the eastern regions of Ukraine have led to significant economic disruption and displacement, with many Ukrainians suffering from poverty and unemployment. Despite these challenges, there are still some reasons for cautious optimism. The recent ceasefire agreement between Ukraine and Russia, signed in July 2020, has been largely holding, and there have been some positive steps towards implementing the Minsk Agreements. Furthermore, there is a growing recognition among the international community of the need to address the underlying political and economic grievances that are driving the conflict. Overall, while the likelihood of a peaceful resolution to the conflict remains uncertain, there are still some reasons for hope that a lasting solution can be found through continued diplomatic efforts and a commitment to dialogue and compromise. Some text goes here. What is the future of Ukraine's relationship with Russia, given the current conflict? Some text goes here. The future of Ukraine's relationship with Russia remains uncertain, given the ongoing conflict and the deep-seated tensions between the two countries. The annexation of Crimea by Russia and the ongoing conflict in eastern Ukraine have led to a significant deterioration in relations between the two countries, with many Ukrainians viewing Russia as an aggressor and a threat to their sovereignty. At the same time, Russia continues to view Ukraine as an integral part of its sphere of influence and has sought to maintain its strategic and economic interests in the country. Russia has continued to provide support to the separatist movements in eastern Ukraine, and has sought to undermine Ukraine's efforts to integrate more closely with the West. Despite these challenges, there have been some positive developments in recent years, including the signing of the ceasefire agreement in July 2020 and ongoing efforts to implement the Minsk agreements. There have also been some signs of the willingness on both sides to engage in dialogue and compromise, and to address the underlying political and economic grievances that are driving the conflict. Ultimately, the future of Ukraine's relationship with Russia will depend on a range of factors, including the political and economic stability of both countries, the willingness of both sides to engage in dialogue and compromise, and the role of the international community in supporting a peaceful resolution to the conflict. While the path forward remains uncertain, there is still hope that a lasting solution can be found through continued diplomatic efforts and a commitment to dialogue and reconciliation. 11. How has the conflict affected the political landscape of Ukraine, including the government and political parties? The conflict in eastern Ukraine has had a significant impact on the political landscape of the country, including on the government and political parties. One of the most significant impacts has been the rise of nationalist and populist movements, which have capitalized on the anger and frustration of many Ukrainians towards Russia and the ongoing conflict. This has led to the emergence of new political parties and movements, such as the People's Front and the Radical Party, which have sought to position themselves as defenders of Ukraine's sovereignty and independence. At the same time, the conflict has also highlighted deep-seated divisions within Ukrainian society, particularly between the Ukrainian-speaking West and the Russian-speaking East. This has made it difficult for political parties to build broad-based support across the country, and has contributed to ongoing political instability and fragmentation. The conflict has also had a significant impact on the government, with a number of high-profile political leaders stepping down or being removed from office in the wake of the crisis. This has led to a degree of political instability, and has made it difficult for the government to implement much-needed reforms and address the underlying political and economic challenges facing the country. Despite these challenges, however, there have also been some positive developments in recent years, including the election of a new president and the implementation of a range of reforms aimed at strengthening democratic institutions and promoting economic growth. Overall, the conflict has had a significant impact on the political landscape of Ukraine, but there are still reasons for hope that the country can emerge from the crisis stronger and more resilient. Some text goes here. What is the history of the relationship between Russia and Ukraine, and how has it led to the current conflict? Some text goes here. The history of the relationship between Russia and Ukraine is complex and fraught with tension, and has played a significant role in the current conflict between the two countries. One of the key factors contributing to the tensions between Russia and Ukraine is their shared history and cultural ties. Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union for much of the 20th century, and has a large Russian-speaking population. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, Ukraine became an independent state, but continued to maintain close economic and political ties with Russia. In 2014, however, this relationship began to unravel, following the ouster of Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych in the wake of mass protests against his pro-Russian policies. Russia responded by annexing Crimea. 13. What is the impact of the conflict on the security of Europe as a whole? The conflict between Russia and Ukraine has had a significant impact on the security of Europe as a whole, both in terms of regional stability and broader geopolitical tensions. One of the key concerns is the potential for the conflict to spill over into other parts of Europe, particularly in the Baltic states and other countries with significant Russian-speaking populations. This has led to increased security measures and military readiness across the region, as countries seek to bolster their defenses against potential Russian aggression. In addition, the conflict has highlighted the broader challenge of balancing competing security interests in Europe, including Russia's desire for a sphere of influence in its near abroad and the West's efforts to promote democratic values and institutions. This has led to a degree of geopolitical tension, with the conflict in Ukraine serving as a flashpoint for broader debates about the future of European security. The conflict has also had implications for the broader international system, with Russia and the West increasingly at odds over a range of issues, from the conflict in Syria to Russian interference in Western democracies. This has led to a deterioration in diplomatic relations and increased competition between the two sides. Overall, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has had significant implications for the security of Europe as a whole, and underscores the ongoing challenges of balancing competing security interests and promoting regional stability. 14. How has the conflict affected the lives of civilians, such as refugees and internally displaced persons? The conflict between Russia and Ukraine has had a significant impact on the lives of civilians, particularly refugees and internally displaced persons, IDPs. According to the United Nations, the conflict has displaced over 1.5 million people since it began in 2014, with many forced to flee their homes due to violence, insecurity, and economic hardship. This has led to significant humanitarian challenges, with many IDPs struggling to access basic necessities like food, shelter, and healthcare. The conflict has also had a disproportionate impact on vulnerable populations, including women, children, and the elderly. Women, in particular, have been subject to increased gender-based violence and exploitation, with many forced into sex work and other forms of exploitation in order to survive. In addition, the conflict has had broader social and economic impacts, with many communities in conflict-affected areas facing significant disruptions to their daily lives. Schools, hospitals, and other vital services have been damaged or destroyed, while many businesses have been forced to close due to the conflict. Overall, the conflict in Ukraine has had a significant impact on the lives of civilians, particularly refugees and IDPs, and has created significant humanitarian challenges that continue to this day. While efforts are underway to address these challenges, the ongoing conflict and political instability make it difficult to achieve lasting solutions. Some text goes here. What is the role of media and propaganda in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine? Some text goes here. Media and propaganda have played a significant role in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, with both sides using these tools to shape public opinion and advance their respective narratives. In particular, Russia has been accused of using propaganda and disinformation to fuel separatist sentiment in eastern Ukraine and undermine the legitimacy of the Ukrainian government. This has included the use of state-controlled media outlets to promote pro-Russian narratives and the dissemination of false information, including allegations of Ukrainian government atrocities and Western support for extremist groups. On the Ukrainian side, the government and its supporters have also been accused of using propaganda and media to advance their own agenda, including efforts to demonize Russia and portray the conflict as a struggle between democracy and authoritarianism. Overall, the role of media and propaganda in the conflict has been significant, with both sides using these tools to shape public opinion and advance their respective agendas. This has led to a highly polarized and divisive media landscape, which has in turn contributed to ongoing tensions and the difficulty of achieving a peaceful resolution to the conflict.